U.S. government and double standards go together like chocolate and peanut butter. But if you're a regular person with access to sensitive military operations, don't take a page out of Pete Hegseth's book. Things go badly when the normal people release classified information. And we're going to talk about why there seems to be a different set of rules for people at the top of the food chain. Just what does it mean to out U.S. military secrets on your favorite social media app, and why it depends on exactly who you are and what you're sharing. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Train Daily. And that means that I am online a lot. And unfortunately, that means that my personal information, like cell phone number, home address, even my family's information, ends up on those creepy data broker sites. But that's where today's sponsor, Delete Me, can help. Delete Me is a service that scrubs your data from those sketchy sites. I signed up a few weeks ago, and within days, they found dozens of places with my info and they got it removed. And the best part is that they continuously are scanning, removing my data year round. So I don't have to constantly be checking for it myself. It was so effective that I actually showed it to my wife, and she asked that I sign her up for it as well. And so if you're online as much as I am, especially work or just in your daily life, you need to protect yourself. These data brokers make it way too easy for scammers and spammers to find your personal info. And Delete Me takes care of that for you. Right now, you can get 20% off with my link at joindeleteme.com/veteran20 and use the code veteran20 for 20% off. Seriously, you don't want to wait until it's too late. Check out Delete Me today. The link is in the description. And thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video. I want to take you guys back to 1 million years ago, April 2023, in which a airman from the U.S. Air National Guard, a part-timer in Massachusetts, you might recall, was found to have leaked top-secret national defense information, including the Ukrainian counteroffensive plans, which apparently, given the fact that the counteroffensive failed pretty massively, indicates that it seems likely that the leaker, a man named Jack Teixeira, leaked basically the entire Ukrainian military plans on the counteroffensive. This was something that the U.S. was training and equipping the Ukrainians for, and the U.S. was working hand in hand with the Ukrainians to prepare. And you might recall that that counteroffensive was almost an unmitigated disaster. The Russians were essentially lying in wait, fully prepared for the Ukrainian actions, knowing full well how long they had and how and where the Ukrainians were going to attack. It made basically Ukraine's best chance to liberate their country go up in smoke. So I think this is relevant for a couple of reasons. First, it's another example of leaking military plans. Even something as simple as a timeline can be massively consequential, right? And Teixeira, it's worth noting, shared this secret information on literally an anonymous Discord server, friends of the internet, right? Trying to impress his friends. Now, it is very hard for me to believe that. This is someone who took an enormous risk, and what I would maintain is that there's likely more to the story, right? This is someone who likely obtained this very sensitive information, not for his own shits and giggles. Again, it's hard to overstate the fact that the consequences for this are enormous, and they have been for Mr. Teixeira, who at 22 years old is now been sentenced to 15 years in prison and 3 years of supervised release, and he's barred from having contact with foreign agents, which is interesting given the fact that officially they said Jack Teixeira shared national defense information on a social media platform in an attempt to impress anonymous friends on the internet. Seems highly unlikely. Again, I think it's much more likely that he shared that information afterward, or publicly releasing it in that way was something that was meant to transfer it to the Russian handlers, right, in order to avoid an espionage charge. I actually think that's what it is, right? Because you can't say, oh, I passed this to my Russian handler and received a large sum of money in exchange. But instead you say, oh, I dropped it into a Discord chat with the bros. And if someone else may have obtained it from there, unbeknownst to me, it is simply not an issue. Now, obviously, this kind of thing is, while leaking information is a crime, coordinating with a foreign intelligence service to betray your country's interests is more than a crime. That's treason. And 15 years in prison is bad. But let's be honest, guys, it could get overturned on appeal. And it could also, of course, have his sentence reduced, time reduced for good behavior, early release. He could be out in as little as 7 or 8 years. And then, right? So you're talking about the difference between 7 or 8 years versus being executed as a traitor, particularly given that he was a uniform member of the U.S. services. So his actions would carry even more dire consequences if he actually did betray the United States for an enemy. Then for the record, for those of you who may be confused based on the White House's most recent posture, the Russian Federation and its dictator Vladimir Putin are indeed enemies of the United States. And so, right, they say this is not a victimless crime. The exceptionally grave damage he caused will impact our national security for decades to come. Again, the U.S. Kind of being humiliated as the Ukrainian forces trained and equipped by the U.S. failed so epically. And of course, in classic U.S. military fashion, they immediately blamed the Ukrainians for everything that went wrong, claiming that, of course, NATO tactics are perfect and have no need for updating. And this is just, I think, just such a classic story of just exactly what happens when you leak top secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information into and out into the world. But he's not alone in facing consequences for dropping hot takes in the group chat. Literally, we also have another group chat gone bad, right? U.S. Army soldiers have also been arrested for leaking classified information to the Chinese, right? Three individuals, including two active duty U.S. Army soldiers and one former soldier, have been arrested for their involvement in a scheme to steal sensitive military information and sell it to the Chinese, right? Now, they say that these suspects work together to gather and transmit classified military documents, including information on U.S. weapon systems and military readiness. Investigation uncovered these individuals engaged in bribery, theft of government property, and illegal sharing of national defense information. This scheme went on for years, in fact. And one of the arrested soldiers, a U.S. Army supply sergeant, allegedly collected and attempted to sell classified hard drives marked secret and top secret to individuals in China, receiving payments of at least $10,000. Is that worth it, right? Well, if you're a U.S. Army specialist, you're talking about, something in the realm of, a 30-year salary? You're going to make around $30,000 a year. So that's actually not that much money. Let's see if I can find who it is. I think I know who it is because it was on my social media. Spying. Let's see if we can find it. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. From the record. Boom. In fact, they have identified the two people. The two individuals who served in the military for several years. Is this the right one? Yep, this is the right one. Rio Duan and First Lieutenant Li Tian, charged with conspiring to commit bribery and theft of government property. A battery supply sergeant, Jian Zhao, face the same charges. This is really interesting. These are all Chinese nationals. Dual Chinese nationals. And they were tasked by someone with gathering information related to U.S. military weapon systems, including the Bradley and the Stryker, and then began disseminating sensitive materials to the Chinese via, shipping dozens of encrypted hard drives over the course of years, right? And they also got their hands on military exercises and conflict simulations with China. And he tried to sell it out. He said he had good stuff that is, quote, super difficult to get, but he wanted to get an appropriate price. In a couple of years, anything that touches HIMARS, $3,000 to $4,000 is the starting price, he said, allegedly referring to a rocket launcher used by the U.S. Army. After negotiations, Zhao settled on $2,500 for, quote, one copy, imploring his contact, go talk to the others about a price for the rest. So this is, again, and after leaving the army, right? And this is just absolutely a classic example of, well, spying. I don't know what else to tell you. This U.S. military soldier, let's see if we can find more about it. I think this is let's see if we can find more about them, because I heard a rumor that, again, these guys are Chinese nationals out here selling secrets to China. Oh, ad blocked. And here's the thing. These guys are going to get the book thrown at them because they weren't just leaking things carelessly. They were selling them, distributing them to Chinese nationals. But here's the thing, guys. There's one other thing, right? There's a lot of discussion about war plans. And you saw that we sold simulations and technical data, but our war plans also considered classified. The answer is absolutely yes. A U.S. official was charged over leaking not U.S. information, but in fact, Israeli national defense information. That's right. A U.S. government official has been charged for leaking documents showing Israeli military plans for their attack on Iran that took place in October of last year. All right. Leaked classified documents are said to have contained the U.S.'s assessment of the plan ahead of the attack and the movements of Israeli military assets in preparation. The official, named Asif Rahman, arrested in Cambodia on Tuesday, brought to Guam to face charges. He worked for the CIA abroad, held a top secret security clearance, and was due in court on Thursday, right? Thursday, like fucking 6 months ago. And what I think is interesting is, again, all this is pointing to evidence that for regular people, if you share national defense information, secret classified national defense information, top secret or secret, rather, I should use my terminology correctly, you're going to face consequences, even if you're not directly sharing it to a foreign power. But there's a but. There's a but in this story. What is it? Well, the answer is there's a different set of rules if you're high up in the government. Why is that? Well, the answer is that it's called classification authority. And one of the rules of classified information is that the original classification authority is El Presidente. It's the man in the White House. If he says something's unclassified, then it is unclassified. That's one of the reasons that, in fact, the president was able to skirt being charged with keeping classified documents in his Mar-a-Lago estate in an unsecured location. The reason is because they said, ultimately, if you are the U.S. president and you are the originator of classified national defense information, then you have to be, you are the only one who can decide if it's unclassified. And the president, the commander in chief, can decide if something is or is not sensitive and to national security concerns. So by definition, if Trump says it's unclassified, it is unclassified. And in fact, what's interesting is that he's not alone. Right? They found that President Biden did the exact same thing, taking classified information and keeping it in his house. He was investigated, and ultimately, instead of actually going to court and trying to even charge him with it, the investigator simply found that Biden was too mentally incapacitated to essentially be liable, which, if you're curious, for those of you keeping score at home, you might recall that having a president who doesn't have the mental capability to be found criminally liable for actions probably shouldn't be running the country. That was another valid concern. And so, though, the funny thing is, it was all for naught, because even if Biden was sharp as a tack, turns out Supreme Court says it was always legal. It was always his to keep wherever he wants. Now, what does that have to do with Pete Hegseth and the Director of National Intelligence? Well, the answer is actually classifications and classified information is an agency by agency basis, right? Most security clearances apply only inside the agency where the holder works. If one needs to meet with another agency to discuss classified matters, it's possible that your clearance transfers, right? So just because the CIA says you have a top secret level security clearance, that could be done with an entirely different process than a top secret security clearance in somewhere like the Department of Homeland Security. Even though in many working groups in the government, they all sit down together and talk about the same information, right? And so this is really interesting, right? And what is most interesting, again, is that there is, classification is done by a classification authority, an individual charged by the U.S. government, the right and responsibility to properly determine the level of classification and the reason for classification. Generally, these are agency heads, right, who must determine the appropriate classification level and the reason the information is to be classified, right? There's an executive order that describes the reasons and requirements that something might be classified, but individual agencies develop their own guidelines. So sort of by definition, if you are the director of national intelligence or the head of the Pentagon, you could argue that they, by definition, get to decide if something's classified or not. They, by definition, get to... if they say something can be released in the group chat, the FIRE group chat, then they can be released. It's their decision to make, right? And what's worth noting, though, is that you have the actual classification categories, right? Which include, of course, military plans, weapon systems, or operations, all of which were released in the group chat with the principal's working group or whatever. But there's a larger conversation here, right? Just because something is not a crime, that is a low bar, right, for operational security, right? It is not a crime for me to, for example, it was not a crime for me to disclose in great detail on my channel everywhere I was going to be in Ukraine when I traveled there, right? But would you guys feel that is smart? Would that be an intelligent thing? Every right to do it, not a crime, but it is not good operational security, right? And so that is the question you have to ask yourself here, is that, yes, legally, the Secretary of Defense, the DNI, these guys can do whatever they want. They can classify and unclassify things more or less willy-nilly. And this is not something that routinely happens. For example, the U.S. had classified information about crimes committed by the dictator Pinochet in Chile in the 70s and 80s. And the president, the White House said, you know, we're going to declassify these and we're going to hand them to Chile as part of, to help with their Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? And this is typical stuff, right? Things get declassified, information gets declassified and leaked to journalists by officials in the White House. And it's rare that they're prosecuted because usually that's done with permission from the boss. Again, this is from the principle that if the president declassifies it, if the president decides that in the aggregate, this information is worth having, right? Look no further than, for example, all the information around the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And you could argue that there are many other operations comparable in scale and scope that are still classified. But it was seen as so important to the U.S. political and the U.S. larger strategy to declassify this operation in detail that the U.S. chose to do it, right? They probably said, listen, yeah, we don't want someone to claim that they're the real bin Laden. We don't want someone to emerge and claim that we are holding him in Guantanamo Bay prison, or that we mistreated the body, or that we, abused or assaulted the women in the house, right? So they said, listen, we're going to practice radical transparency. Within hours of it happening, this is everything we did. This is everything we used. This is all of it. And again, the only person who can make those calls are the people at that White House level. But then you got to ask yourself a deeper question, which is, what does it say about the judgment, right? Was in that chat, was it necessary to drop times, packages, locations Was any of that necessary? Did it assume an undue level of risk to have those chats? Did anything happen? No, literally every message after that was high fives, good jobs, we did great, wow. And you got to ask yourself, why couldn't you have just said, strike's complete? Maybe not even that. Maybe you could have just said, check your high side emails. That's it. Would have been way less egregious. Probably wouldn't have even constituted war plans, right? And the other issue with this is that because now they've outed themselves as using Signal, every foreign power, everyone who thinks they can compromise Signal is going to be trying diligently to get their hands on a phone, find a way to worm into that app, right? In fact, let's see if I can find it. FBI warns Signal not secure. I believe that in fact, some in the FBI actually are saying that Signal not all that safe. Now, Signal does use end-to-end encryption, right? In case so that if someone intercepts the message, they're good to go, right? But remember, if the hacker can look in the phone itself, let's say you download some other dirtbag app, right? A drone app, a dumb AI, anything that lets you see the phone, you can get access to the message. It only prevents interception of the message. That is a low bar. And the fact is that you've just created an incentive for highly sophisticated actors like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea to target these individuals and other individuals at a high level in the White House, target them as Signal users. And remember, you can search for Signal users. Whether or not someone is on Signal is eminently apparent, is easily detectable. And so that alone could be a problem. And in fact, what I want to point out, you may notice that even if you cannot declassify the message of Signal, if you can obtain just the frequency of messages, you can learn something. Look at what we just observed, where they created a principal working group on Signal. There's a flurry of messages, and then the group vanished. Well, what happens if let's say you're China, and you say, I know this CIA officer. We're pretty sure Mike Smith works in China. We're pretty sure he's on the Chinese team. Maybe he's even on something. We think he's working on a cyber attack against our military intelligence, and you're the Chinese. Well, let's say you can observe Mike Smith's Signal activity. You can't decode the messages. You can only see when they've been sent, but you just get garbled gibberish. Well, what happens when you see all of a sudden Mike Smith's phone and the Secretary of Defense's phone and Tulsi Gabbard's phone start to bing, 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 bing? You go, I think the Americans are going to be up to something. Let's go on high alert. That's the kind of thing that you don't need to decode the messages to get useful, classified information to obtain it. And so we've got to ask ourselves, is this larger program, is this larger action reflect the kind of wisdom, poise, and thoughtfulness that we expect from our leaders? And again, I'm not sitting there and being like, Biden White House good, Trump White House bad. I just described to you a culture that has been slowly degrading around secrecy. And we've talked about this in other videos, but part of the reason, part of the incentive to use your own phone, an app like Signal, is because it can't be hit. Well, it should be hit with discovery, but you get to claim in court. You get to go, I've never done government business off my government phone. So I don't need to turn over my private phone to you for discovery in this lawsuit, for FOIA, for whatever it is. You go, I've never done government business on my phone. And the thing that sucks now is that basically everybody in the White House, that gets thrown in the trash. So if you sue the Secretary of Defense, you say, you fired me unlawfully. And you say, well, okay, to prove it, I need to go through your text messages. That's discovery. And they say, okay, well, here's my government phone. You'll see nothing's in there. And you go, well, no. We know you do business on your private phone, so we need to get access to that. And then all that information ends up potentially in open court. Now, there's also workarounds. But this is kind of an unmitigated disaster, but the argument about was it technically classified or not is a red herring. The question is, was it stupid? Was it reckless? Does it reflect the good judgment you expect from a Secretary of Defense? And does that action make America safer? Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks to James Sterling, Steve Marack, Doug Beck, Alan Lutz, Bastian Himmeling, Brian Kelly, Del McCombs, James Walla, Henry Roos here. And of course, today's sponsor, Delete Me. Thank you, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.